For more insight into China's economy and where it's headed and on a global stage as well, let's turn to John Gong. John's professor at the University of International Business and Economics and a China Forum expert. John, always good to see you, my friend. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much for having me, Sean.
Well, it seems like companies certainly raced in China to export before Trump's tariffs kicked in. When will the tariff bite begin to affect China, if at all?
Well, the tariffs are already starting to bite exports to the United States. But I've always been saying this, the export sectors in China have never failed to pleasantly surprise us. And it's been delivering results quarter after quarter, month after month. It's quite striking to see that even amidst a 11% drop of exports to the United States, the exports still increased by almost 7% by dollar terms for the first 7 months of this year. This is just striking to see it. And I think this reflects the fact that Chinese products are still very much welcome. Around the world, Chinese companies engaged in exports are very resilient. And also, I think there's a sort of like a structural change that the United States market as a total share, as a share of the total exports is starting to drop. Actually, it's less than 10% right now. Yeah. Clearly, the tariffs are taking effect, but it's not going to affect China's aggregate exports as a whole.
I think a lot of people are going to be wondering, look, at some point it's going to have some kind of effect because the U.S. has traditionally imported so much. So which sectors in China do you think are going to be hit the hardest by U.S. trade restrictions?
Well, I think across the board things are being affected. From labor-intensive products to high-end products. I think overall, President Trump's tariffs are across the board. It doesn't offer much exemptions, and probably one big change that I would anticipate as we move forward is the exports of Apple phones. Apple phones account for a big chunk of China's exports to the United States. Apple still manufactures the bulk of its exports to the United States in China, with the tariffs raised, and particularly with President Trump's attention on Apple Computer, Apple is under tremendous political pressure to relocate its manufacturing base back to the United States. So I think this is one product that's probably going to be hit very hard by tariffs.
I think that's a good point, and we saw just on Wednesday, Tim Cook in the White House basically saying we're going to do billions of dollars worth of business in the United States. So clearly Apple is feeling that. But one thing China has been incredibly good about is strengthening those ties that it has, especially to the global south, to ASEAN nations. And we've seen these trade deals really reinforced. And that seems to be coming to fruition if we look at the trade numbers, the tremendous increase in China year to year, at the same time losing double-digit exports rather to the United States.
Yeah, well, I think this is more than just exports. It has a lot to do with Chinese companies increasing investments in these areas. We have this Belt and Road Initiative building infrastructures in a lot of these countries in the global south. And then this is usually followed by more investments from corporate China. And there's ample empirical evidence to show that these investments, these infrastructure built out in those countries actually lead to more exports from China to these countries. So I think this is actually more of a structural change. The exports flows to these countries is going to continue. And it's I want to honestly admit that this also creates more of a trade surplus problem from these countries as a trade deficit problem. But nevertheless, I think increased investments in these countries, as well as China trying to import more from these countries, will probably balance trade a little bit. And on top of this, we have importing services, including tourism. There's a lot of tourism happening from China to these countries.
John, in any way, do you think that we're entering a new phase of deglobalization? Because China, as we've talked about, has strengthened its relations with many, many countries this year, and at the same time reduced its dependency on the U.S.
Well, I think it's I wouldn't characterize as deglobalization. I think it's this is this is President Trump's agenda. I think the trade policy, the tariff policy, is part of his foreign policy. Basically, I think President Trump thinks that the WTO, the international rules-based order that the United States helped establish 70 some years ago, is working against the United States. He wants to totally upend that system. Look at what he has been doing. He has been establishing these bilateral deals with each country, totally bypassing the WTO, totally in violation of the WTO spirit, at least. So I think this is a structural change. This is an entire new world we're facing right now. And I have a phrase for this. I describe this as N-1 system. Unfortunately, United States, at least the Trump administration chooses to be that -1.